Welcome to House of Fables in Conversations with, and today we have best-selling author of epic romantic fantasy, Helen Scheuerer. Thank you for coming, Helen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Well, today we're going to go through, first of all, a little bit to get to know you, and we're going to ask you quite a few questions just about what it's like to be an author and the business of being an indie, so we can get a little bit of an inside look into that side of your life. And then at the end of our chat, we will be talking spoilers for Vows and Ruins, which is a book 2 in the Legends of Thezmarr series. So if you haven't read it, you can still watch the first half of this video, and I will let everybody know when we're starting to chat spoilers. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe so that we can bring more conversations with indie authors in the future. But let's get started. So Helen, you're an Australian living in New Zealand, is that right?
That is correct.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your daily life?
Daily life. It's basically sitting in my office trying to work on whatever book I'm working on. So for example, the last week I've been outlining something new. So it basically involves me sitting at the desk. Outlining tends to be a much messier process for me. So I'll have books and notepads strewn about the place. And mainly I'm pulling out my hair trying to come up with stuff to put in the book and make sense of it. Like usually I have like a mess of ideas, and then I'm trying to put them into some sort of linear thing that makes sense that I can then turn into a book. So yeah, it's usually just me in my office. So I write full time. So yeah, that's sort of the gist of it, at least at the moment.
Yeah, how long ago did you move to New Zealand?
When did I move here? 2019. So I became a full-time author in 2018, and then the next year I moved to New Zealand. So yeah, I've been here nearly 5 years.
Wow. What was your favorite books as a teenager?
As a teenager, I really, really loved Tamara Pierce. I never know how to say her name. But the Song of the Lioness was a quartet from back then. And for those who don't know, it's about a girl who dresses up as a boy to become a knight. So you can see some sort of inspiration I've drawn there. Yeah. Very much sort of fighting the patriarchy and swords and all that good stuff. So yeah, I really loved her. Harry Potter was also hugely influential just in terms of a love for an ongoing series.
Yeah.
And then Del Toro Quest as well, which is an Aussie middle grade fantasy series.
Fantastic.
They're only small books, but epic quest and series. So yeah, they were all very, very influential, I think.
Oh, amazing. And what's your favorite genre to read now? Do you still read a lot of fantasy while you're writing fantasy, or do you find it hard?
Yeah, the last year I found it quite hard to read fantasy just because I'm working really long hours. I'm writing and editing a lot of fantasy. So more so now I've been reading a lot of contemporary romance just because I can forget my troubles sort of thing. It doesn't feel like work, whereas unfortunately writing a lot of romantic fantasy and fantasy romance, reading it, I've lost a little bit of the joy for it. So yeah, I tend to sort of escape into contemporary romance at the moment.
And do you do audiobooks over reading? Do you think do you find that having that difference, or do you still love to curl in bed at night and have a good book?
Yeah, I find audio for me, I think I find it hard to like immerse myself in it. Like if I have audio going, I'm thinking about something else, I'm doing something else, and I don't tend to sink into it as much. So I generally read on my Kindle. And that's how I sort of sink into it. Because yeah, otherwise there's too much other stuff going on.
In the brain. So did you always dream of being an author, and have you done any training yourself before you wrote your first book?
Yeah, so I think I've always wanted to be an author. Like I remember being 7 years old and writing the first story and the progression after that. I guess you kind of get told that it's not really a viable career path,
Yes.
which I didn't really listen to luckily. Yeah. And so, yeah, I did creative writing at university. And then after that, I did a master's of publishing. So I very much did the tertiary level education in this field. Not that it's necessary. For me, I knew I wanted to go to uni. And if I was going to go to uni, I didn't want to study something I wasn't interested in. So I ended up doing creative writing. And I mean, funnily enough, the creative writing degree very much it was very much restrictive in terms of, you know, you only studied classics, you only studied literary fiction. There wasn't a broader conversation about commercial fiction or genre. Indie publishing wasn't really talked about at all in that particular degree. But it was good. Yeah. It was good in the way that it set you up for receiving criticism, for reworking your books, and the sort of editorial process. I think it was good experience for. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't take back doing those degrees, but also it's not a prerequisite for writing a book.
Yeah. What ultimately made you want to go down the route of independently publishing, or did you go on submission to traditional publishers at all?
So when I left my degree, like I graduated and everything, I was working on a literary fiction manuscript because I was very influenced by what we were studying at the time. I thought, you know, if I was going to be taken seriously, I had to write literary fiction. So I wrote a book for literary fiction, and that was signed by a small press. And so I had a bit of experience in the traditional space. Luckily, and I say luckily because I think it really worked out for the best, that those rights were reverted back to me. And that whole process showed me a lot about what trad is like. And at the time, it was just, and it was also working with a small press over one of the big five. It's all very different. So everybody's experiences will be vastly different. But luckily, as I did that editorial process, I sort of realized I wanted to write fantasy and not literary fiction.
Yeah.
And so while I was editing this other book, I was doing NaNoWriMo for a young adult fantasy book. And I was blogging about that process.
Yeah.
And I had a commissioning editor from one of the big five find out about it, and they asked for me to submit that book. And I was like, I had already sort of decided I wanted to indie publish that, which it became Heart of Mist, which was my first first book. Yeah. And so yeah, I asked her, oh, you know, how long do you think it'll take for you to read it and let me know what you think, blah, blah, blah. And she said, oh, about 8 weeks, maybe more. And I was like, nah, it's too long. Especially because I'd done a course in indie publishing. I kind of had the whole thing set up, ready to go. And I mean, she could have taken 8 weeks and got back to me and said no. So I just decided then and there that I wanted the creative control, the control over my production schedule, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I ended up saying like, thank you very much for the interest, but I'm going to go the indie road anyway. Yeah.
So you did a little course in indie publishing as well, like that was out of uni, and did that the basics of this is kind of what you've got to get done to publish a book, sort of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't remember all the different timelines, but I did my undergrad in creative writing. I did a master's in publishing, and that master's was very much traditional focused. But you learnt a lot about the book production process, which I loved. And so that's all about the editing processes, what happens after, the marketing, all the different stages, all the different departments that go into a big house sort of thing. And I really loved that.
Actually, the business of publishing. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so I don't know if it was before or after or during that degree. It was a long time ago now, but I did a self-publishing course that kind of built upon everything I was learning in the master's degree,
Yeah.
and it just sort of solidified for me that I liked the idea of the creative control and
Yeah.
working with my own editor, my own cover designer, and creating the product myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, that course was really informative, and that was I think it was Self-Publishing 101 it was called.
And what do you think are the best parts or the benefits of being an independently published author?
Definitely the creative control, also the control over your own timelines. Like right now, I'm working with a literary agent for my foreign rights and my audio rights and all that sort of stuff. So that side of things is all traditionally published. So technically, I'm a hybrid author now.
Yes.
But what it's sort of showing me, and what I knew all along, is that the traditional side of the business takes much, much longer. And I like to, like, as you can see behind me, this is my production schedule. I control this.
You know how much I love your videos showing your like lists. I'm
Yeah,
like, she's showing me another list.
chaos over there. Yeah. Um, so, so yeah, I think definitely it's just control. Or maybe I'm just a control freak, but I very much like that aspect of it,
Yeah.
because I know when books are coming out. I know what my income's going to look like. I can, I have control over my marketing and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas, that might change at some point in the future, but especially as I'm still in the early stages of my career. I very much enjoy that aspect of it, and being able to plan and connect with other people around the plans that I've made, all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
I think because you have that control and that timeline, you find that you can react to readers quicker or pivot how your marketing is or change things up from book to book release, compared to where a traditional publisher, it might take they are talking about a book a year before it comes out, and then by the time that author is writing the second book, they haven't had that opportunity to change things up or pivot. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
that live feedback from your
Yeah.
readers and adjust that.
Yeah, absolutely. To a certain extent, I suppose, because I'm quite far ahead in my schedule. So, as I think before we started recording, I said to you, "Oh, I'm 2 books ahead." So I'm I'm struggling to remember what happened 3 books ago.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, in terms of marketing, in terms of connecting with readers, I think that is definitely a benefit. Being able to pivot, being able to incorporate any feedback that you get, whether that is about your marketing or the story itself. It is a lot more flexible in that regard, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think are the most challenging things of being an independent author?
There's a lot of challenges, I'm not going to lie. I think, as an indie author, for the most part, you are every department in the publishing business. So you are the author, but you're also the marketer, you're the finance person, you are the advertising person. I hire editors and stuff, but the management and the liaising with different editors, beta readers, designers, all of that, it's all on me. So there is a lot of juggling. And also, like, sometimes what can be difficult is your own voice, and there's not necessarily a team of people who've got your back to help when things get a bit awkward, or who are liaising with someone on your behalf. It's always you. And so, there's a lot of different challenges throughout all these different departments and stuff. Sometimes I do miss having someone in my corner. It's been really good having my new agent. I changed agents at the end of last year, and he's been really fantastic in that I know he's out there speaking on my behalf about, different deals and stuff, and I'm not having to be that person.
Having someone you can trust that's out there that's got your back.
Exactly. So yeah, though, I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And does that mean that you have to like split your days? So you can say Monday is my day where I'm doing my marketing and I'm replying to emails, and Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm just writing? Or do you find that you can kind of mix and match up your days depending on what you've got going on?
Yeah, like, I mean, my strengths are quite rigid in terms of, like, my number one strength is focus. So I'm talking about the Clifton strengths. It's a big thing in the indie community that everybody's always talking about, but I'm a very focused person, and so I actually struggle to split my focus across multiple things. So it's something that I find very difficult, is the balance between the admin and the marketing and the actual production of the book itself.
Yes.
So I sort of, like, right now, I've spent my weekend doing admin and marketing, so that my actual work week, I spent the whole work week outlining, and then I'm due to start writing on Monday, and that's all I'll do for 4 weeks. And I'll try and fit in the admin and the marketing
Around.
on the weekends or around it, but I don't want to, compromise the full-time work of writing for, answering an email or posting on social media, because my actual job is writing books. So I have to be quite careful with how I balance the time and the different tasks and stuff. But generally, admin and marketing gets squeezed in wherever it can, and the priority is the writing.
Well, that is the priority. You don't want to get distracted, because if you open your phone to post something, then you're replying to comments, and then it's an hour later, and you're like, okay, and you've got to get your head back in the game. And I can see why having that rigid time would be beneficial in the long run, to be able to actually be
And I think, like, what helps me be like, that rigid structure sort of helps me in that you don't know what's going to derail you. So if I spend time on social media, I'll get tagged in a shitty review, or somebody will say something, or, the more I'm in the game and the more sort of bigger the books get and the more audience I have, it is harder to filter out the negative stuff. And so I don't want to mid-draft see a terrible review and then it, derails what I'm doing, and it's like, this emotional gut punch. Yeah,
I can see that. I can see authors as they get bigger, in the sense of more and more people are reading their books, they're leaving reviews. It would be harder to navigate that space, because it's different on Goodreads, right? Because that you can just choose to not go on Goodreads. But when authors and reviewers are in the same space together on social media, whether that's Instagram or TikTok, even if they don't tag you, it could very easily still come up on your FYP, because they're talking about your book. So I can see how that could be hard to navigate, for sure. In regards to your writing, are you I imagine that you are. This is how I imagine Helen does it. I imagine you are I imagine you're a plotter. Like, I imagine you plot that out and then you write. Do you have any pantser in you? Or is it just you plot everything to the nth degree and then you're, like, methodical in how you write it? Or have I got you wrong?
No, you've pretty spot on. It's quite obvious behind me. I'm a planner, I'm an outliner, I'm a plotter. But, there is an element of room for spontaneity, for getting to know the characters as the story progresses. So, for example, I just finished the outline of something new 2 days ago. It's 15,000 words long. It is chapter by chapter. Chapter by chapter, and then within that, scene by scene, but loosely. And there is, like, room for me to add stuff if something comes to me, and it's also the first book in a new series, and so I don't know everything there is to know. Sorry?
The book for after book 4 of Legends of Thezmarr?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, like, it might be different, a book 4 in a series versus a book 1. It's a slightly different process. There's a bigger learning curve. But yeah, I like to, especially with the broader plot points, I like to know exactly where it's going, because I want to, tease certain things out. I want to layer certain things in, and I want to plant the seeds, at the beginning that, aren't going to pay off until 3 books later. So I have to, that's why I plot.
You also plot out your entire series then?
Not to the same extent that I outline a book, but I know what's going to happen in book 2 and 3 and so forth of the series, because I need to know pacing wise how it's going to work out. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So that means when you start something, you can envision how it's all going to happen. Like,
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I mean, it does change, because I'll see room for improvement, or, you know, a certain character will come through a lot stronger than I anticipated, and they become more of a star, I guess. But broadly speaking, yeah, I like to know what's happening and what beats to hit.
and what's the like hardest part of writing a book for you? Like, is it the drafting? Is it the editing? Is it the polishing? What's the bit that whenever you get to it, you're like, okay, I've got to get through this bit.
Probably the structural editing. So, I mean, I say that now. I was complaining a lot when I was outlining as well, because it's just so chaotic. Like, there's so many ideas you've got to wrangle into a structure. And so I do that and take a lot of, you know, pride and effort in doing that, because it helps the structural editing. It makes me able to identify potential problems before I've written a, you know, 120,000 word book.
Yes.
But the editing, I think, is quite difficult, and one of my author friends has the same problem, because you are constantly in this critical mindset. You're constantly tearing apart the book and putting it back together. It does get quite emotionally draining,
Yeah.
and you are constantly sort of second guessing yourself or criticizing yourself. So that can be tough. And for me, that process usually lasts about 2 weeks of doing that. So by the end, I'm just, you know, like an emotional shell of a person.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you think that with the rise of social media, especially in the bookish space, that has impacted your career as an author?
Definitely. So, I mean, it, in a way, like, so Blood and Steel, I think, was potentially the most to market book that I'd written. And so that then combined with it finding the right people has definitely helped lift the series as a whole. And I've found a lot of readers that way.
Yeah.
So it's definitely impacted my career in that respect. And then, yeah, I suppose being able to have like my own platform, like right now, I would say Instagram is probably my strongest platform. And being able to share what I want to share there has definitely helped. And it's been a really nice place to connect with other readers, and,
Yes.
you know, and not just like me as an author to readers, but me as a reader and to other readers is really nice as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely played a big part in, you know, the trajectory of my career, I think.
I think as well, because reading in itself is such a solitary habit or hobby, and writing is also extremely solitary. So to have
Yeah.
these communities that have exploded in the last few years, you've got all of these people who have read books and cried and screamed in their room and had no one to cry and scream to, because
Yeah.
online and scream online. And it must be really great to have that marketing tool to be able to share your books while feeling authentic to yourself, rather than just like running
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. There's that element of connection is really unique, I think. And also just being able to communicate what's going on. Like, so, you know, we've all been in a position where we'll be reading a series and we don't know when the next book is coming out. We don't know what's happening with the author, that sort of stuff. And what I really like about Instagram in particular, because that's where I feel I have the most, you know, authentic connections, is that I can tell people, hey, I'm struggling today, or, you know, this happened with the cover and now this is delayed, or, you know, guess what, everything worked out and now I can bring the book forward and you guys get it sooner, which is also really exciting. So I really enjoy the sort of behind the scenes aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and I think readers do too. They get to have
Mm,
a peek behind the scenes and
yeah,
feel that connection with their favorite author, and even things like, you know, fan art being made, and they get to visualize what those characters look like. And
exactly.
yeah, it's amazing. So you published your first book, which was Heart of Mist. You mentioned that
Hmm.
before. and that is a YA epic fantasy trilogy. And then you went
Yes.
on to release another YA epic fantasy quartet starting with Lair of Bones.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think your storytelling craft improved with each of these series, and what did they teach you?
I really hope it's improved. I would really like to think that it's improved. I mean, it's been over 5 years since Heart of Mist came out. So that's, that's quite a lot of books to write in 5 years.
So you're
I know
publishing 2 books a year?
it's sped up. So when I released my first series, it was 1 book a year. With Curse of the Siren Queen, it was 2 books a year. And then since Blood and Steel came out, I did Blood and Steel, I did Slaying the Shadow Prince, and I did Vows and Ruins. So that's 3 books, but not quite in the right order, sort of thing. Um, but yeah, so I would really hope that it's improved. I've definitely learnt a lot. My outlining process has very much developed. So with the Oromir Chronicles, which is the first series, I mean, it's hard to remember now, but I didn't outline nearly as much as I do now. And the way I do it now is part of the learning curve, because I realized, I'd written myself into some corners, or, published 1 book, and then, the third book didn't come out until 2, 3 years later. And I wish I had have been able to change stuff. So I like to, try and get a little bit ahead, so that I'm writing the next book or the book after in the series, and I get to come back and weave in breadcrumbs and weave in certain developments that then you'll have that bigger payoff for at the end. So yeah, definitely.
About how you're writing your stories. So you really like to have those Easter eggs at the beginning that will pay off at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's what I love as a reader, getting those moments where you're like, oh, that's why she did that 2 books ago. Yeah, exactly.
They are absolutely the best. So you've also written 2 non-fiction books, How to Write a Successful Series in 2022, and more recently, How to Launch a Successful Series. What prompted you to write these books, and what are the differences in writing fiction compared to non-fiction?
A lot. There's a lot of differences. So I wrote How to Write a Successful Series in part because I was getting a lot of questions from authors. I think they sort of see books starting to do well, and they wonder what that author is doing to make that happen. So I did have like an influx of authors in my inbox and my private messages asking for help. Also, it was part of a broader strategy to diversify my income from fiction and not have all my eggs in the one basket, sort of thing. And then the second non-fiction book was a very natural follow-on from that first book, because they read the first book and go, well, now what? So that's why I did that. And in terms of the differences, they're worlds apart. Absolutely worlds apart. Non-fiction has a particular structure. You are answering a particular question, whereas fiction is just this, crazy. Yeah, it is just leagues apart.
You find
And
it
in terms,
non-fiction to write non-fiction?
yeah, it was much easier, because I mean, both my non-fiction books in particular are very personal to me and my experiences. So it's like us having this conversation. You're asking me a question, I'm just telling you the answer. So that's how I approached the non-fiction. The second non-fiction book was a little different, in that I went and interviewed a lot of other successful authors in the industry, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just my point of view. But that second book like just flowed out of me. That was very different experience to the sort of crazy times that fantasy romance is.
Yeah, I can imagine. And have you got a third non-fiction due out in 2024?
No. I've basically decided that for the next little while, the fiction is definitely king. I was just splitting my focus too much, and I think, especially for readers as well, whenever I'm doing nonfiction, I'm not doing the next book in the series that they're reading. So I want to make sure I meet those expectations. And I definitely don't want to do any more nonfiction in the midst of an ongoing series. That was very difficult. So I'm sure there'll be something in future, but not for a little while.
From a reader, that makes me very happy, because in the end of this series. I can see why you would have got a lot of independent authors coming into your DMs, because what you do show on social media is somebody who has the business of independently publishing down to like a fine art form.
Oh, thank you. It doesn't feel like that, but thank you.
Well, that's what you're portraying. Like you
Yes.
have everything in order, things go to plan. Like obviously you can pivot, but you know, when you do your cover reveal, you know, it's, you know, you have your team set out and it looks like you've got your processes really set up. And I guess as someone who would be new to doing it, they would look at you and go, okay, how do I get to that point?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because everyone works so differently though. Like, so what works for me won't necessarily work for someone else just because of how you as a person are wired.
Yes,
But
exactly.
you know, I find it interesting to read other people's processes and stuff, even though it might not work for me. I'm just nosy. I just like to know what other people are doing.
Yeah, it's it. This is why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
I'm nosy too. I want to know it all. So, what does your team look like? I know, obviously, as an independent author, you are the accountant and marketing team. You do have an assistant, I know about. But what's your team of editors, beta readers, critique partners? Like, what's your process from drafting to publication? And who do you have in your team to get from start to out in people's hands?
A lot of people actually. So my partner Gary, he is sort of like my brainstorming buddy. So we'll have a wine night with whiteboards, and I'll tell him like the sort of gist of the idea that I've got, and we'll sort of tease it out together. And we go back and forth because, like you pointed out earlier, writing is a very solitary thing, and it can get very intense when all that stuff is just in your brain churning. So he's my sort of first check-in point where I talk out the ideas, refine them. He's great for world building, and we'll sit there and talk about how to make this bigger and better and how that can then pay off later. So he's my first person that I talk to. I have another friend, another author friend, Sasha Black, who runs the Rebel Author podcast, and we run our outlines by each other. So once my outline is done, we'll jump on a Zoom and we'll take each other from start to finish, whoever's we're working on. And that is just like a prompting questions thing. So she'll be like, that doesn't make sense. Can you explain that to me? And I'll realize, oh, there's a hole here, or this character needs more developing. And so then I'll go away and write the book, and then I edit it structurally. So as I'm writing, I keep like a list of all the things that either I'm not ready to make a decision about, or I think there's a problem with, but I don't know the answer yet. So then I take that through a structural edit. After that's done, then I take it to beta readers. So I've got 2 or 3 beta readers at any one point who will read it and essentially do what I would call a manuscript assessment. So they'll look out for things like pacing, character development, structure, you know, underdeveloped anything, they'll point it out. If there's room for improvement, they'll tell me what particular area. And so then I take whatever they've said, combine it into a massive to-do list for myself, and then I'll do another edit. Then it goes to my copy editor. I do the copy edits, then it goes to my proofreading team. So I've got 2 proofers who go through the typeset pages. Then I do that. I've got my cover designer. I have my PA, who you've talked to a few times, I think. So she acts as sort of a buffer between me and the rest of the world a lot of the time, which as an introvert, I very much need. And she takes care of some sort of ad hoc admin stuff, answering emails, answering questions. Who else do I have? I'm probably forgetting somebody really important. That's the main sort of production team, I would say. And then there's people like my agent who's doing foreign rights stuff. And I have an ARC team, a street team for the promotional stuff, but that's on the other end of it. So there's a lot of people, a lot of involvement from different sort of aspects. Yeah.
Copy and line editor, is that editor is doing the copy and line editing? It's not a developmental editor. Is that what your beta team does for you?
My beta team is definitely more the developmental stuff. depending on how confident slash insecure I'm feeling about the book, it might go to someone else at that point for a fresh set of eyes after I've done a lot of structural work.
Yes.
But how many books in, 12 or 13 books in, it usually needs one sort of developmental round with the beta readers. Then
Yeah.
I go through it a few times. Then it goes to copy line edits and the proofers after that.
Fantastic. And how did you find your team? Is it the same team every time? Is it your same beta readers? Is it your same proofreaders? Or do you?
It's changed sort of over the course of the years. Like, I mean, it's a big ask for people to stay with someone for 6 years, reading book after book, and especially as my pace has increased. Like,
Yeah.
the people who say beta read for me for the Oromir Chronicles probably don't want to do 4 books a year for me. And so they've changed. Like, originally I had people who I'd met through my university degrees. Then yeah, I think it was mainly university degrees, and then it's more industry people as I've sort of, become more immersed in the indie community. And yeah, my editor actually originally was my proofreader for the Oromir Chronicles,
Yes.
and as editing has sort of changed hands, she's now become my copy editor. So, and she was actually a beta reader for the Oromir Chronicles way back when. So, like, some people have actually been in it since the very beginning, and maybe the role just sort of shifts. And as I've sort of gone into more romance, I
Yes.
wanted someone who reads a lot more romance, so that shifted again. But yeah, it changes. I've had a different cover designer for every series so far, because you're just looking for different things based on the genre. But yeah, I mean, it does ebb and flow over the course of, half a decade or so. So yeah.
Moving into cover design question, actually, how do you decide on a book cover? And do the formatting yourself, or do you hire to do the interior formatting as well?
The interior formatting I do myself, mainly because I want the control of being able to update it at any time. But I am trying to lean into creating much more like artistic interior design going into a new project anyway. Like, I want, with Legends of Thezmarr anyway, I want that to be consistent. So I'm not going to change it book 3 or 4 in, it's the same. But I am looking at doing some more illustrations and stuff in the stuff that comes after. But ultimately I'll do the interior design. It's whether I hire out, chapter art or end pages, that sort of thing. But as for cover designer, yeah, that's changed over the course of the years. So originally I just did what I liked and I was like, that looks good, I want to do something like that. And then as I sort of got more and more into the indie scene, I realized, I need to do stuff a bit more to market. So I worked with a designer who was doing a lot of indie stuff for my second series. And then with the Legends of Thezmarr, I was much more aware of making things look like they belonged on the shelf with particular comp titles and stuff. So I had a list of comp titles. I went and looked at who was designing their cover and stuff, and that's sort of how I found the designer for Thezmarr.
Do you think that all of the series that you write have similar recurring themes, or do you like to completely change them up between every series that you're writing?
They definitely have similar themes. All of them have epic quests, all of them have battles, all of them have strong women, all of them have flawed women. I think there is always an underlying battle with the patriarchy and like that. I think that is definitely like a core thing that will be in all my books. Even if I try not to, it's in there. So yeah, so that's the stuff that definitely has, whether it's the first book that I've written or the 50th, I think those things will inevitably find their way into the books. Yeah.
Do you prefer to write in third person, or is it just because it's the genre
I
that
mean,
you?
arguably, third person isn't the most popular choice for romance anyway.
More? Yeah.
Yeah, so I prefer writing in third person because I feel like it gives me more freedom in terms of keeping certain things secret and,
We will be
Not
talking
everybody.
about them soon.
Yeah, so like that, I find that a little bit more freeing, particularly in fantasy where the plots are so sprawling. So the Legends of Thezmarr is, I mean, technically it's romantic fantasy, so it is more on the fantasy side than the romance side. So I don't know. I think I could have done it either way. Personally, I preferred to write third person for, just the scope of it. It's more manageable, I think.
Yeah.
That's not to say I wouldn't do first person some
Yeah.
point in the future, but yeah, I've always written third person so far.
And what are your like favorite types of scenes to write? Like when you're getting to a scene, you're like, oh yes, I can't wait to get into this.
I would say pub scenes. I love a good pub scene. Like, I think people expect me to say the sexy scenes, which are also very fun.
Battle scenes, because I love a lot of your battle scenes. They're really, really well choreographed. But pub scenes,
Yeah, because they're like the comic relief in between all this really like hard, heart-wrenching stuff. So
between
yeah, the pub scenes where they're like, getting a bit silly or there's a big feast or something. The battle scenes are interesting. They're hard to write because essentially I've got to plan a battle and I've got to have like I'll have to draw out the battlefield, make
yeah.
sure I know where everybody is, the
You
logistics of
have
it. Like that's actually
like little people.
not quite, but I've got 3 whiteboards that I'll have, or I'll draw it on a piece of paper as I'm writing so I don't forget where somebody is, or, logistically, how do I get a force of this cavalry over here without doing this, XYZ. So I definitely have to map it out. It's quite an undertaking, a battle scene.
I imagine, like, as a reader, those things can feel very magical to read, but I only think that they feel really magical when the author has done the hard work of writing every tiny little moment so that you're
Mhm.
not confused. So I can imagine, as the author, you want the reader to have that magical lost in the world moment, but for you
Mhm.
to be able to get them there, you really have to make sure every the order of operations are there. Like every little
Exactly.
is
And
done.
also the bigger the cast, you've got to make sure you know where everybody is and what everybody's doing. I tend to, especially in the structural editing phase, I'll have to sit down and plot it out. I do a lot of research in terms of like historical battles and the tactics that they used and things like that,
Yeah.
because there's only so many times you can write about two forces just clashing. You want to find out like, did they lure them over here because this is a trap, or you could use this particular weapon, or so I get very nerdy about all that.
That's fun. That's so exciting. Do you have a story in your writer brain that you haven't told yet? That you like feel like you're just not ready to tell yet, but you're like you will one day? Or do you think you're just writing them as you're getting them at the moment?
I think I'm writing them as I'm getting them. I think I am definitely veering into more darker territory as I sort of develop as an author. I'm looking to explore darker themes. Like my books have always been quite dark and gritty,
Yeah.
but you know, there's definitely certain things that I feel like I want a couple books under my belt in order to write. Um, for example, Heart of Mist, which was my first book, one of its themes was addiction, which is like quite a dark theme, particularly for a young adult book. And maybe sometime in the future, I would like to delve into that again with the permission that I have now, writing adult rather than YA. So certain things like that, I would like to explore in more detail. Like writing in the adult space gives you a lot more permission to dive deeper, explore darker, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But generally, if there's a book I want to write, I'm writing it. Yeah.
Yeah. What representation is really important for you to share in your books?
I think for me, it's the plight of women. I think, you know, all the obstacles that we face, like I won't go into, deep, dark stuff, but all women experience prejudice and, a shit ton of stuff that they shouldn't. And I think exploring the inequality, and that rising up against it is massive in my stories. And I probably won't ever write a story that doesn't have a woman facing that and overcoming it, because that's what we want to see. We want to see that there's hope, and that we can do whatever we want to do. So definitely the plight of women is a massive one in all my books, and I think will continue to be in the future.
So now that you've written YA and then you went into new adult with Steel, and then Slaying the Shadow Prince was adult, and it almost feels to me like Vows and Ruins, between the two that I read, Vows and Ruins feels more adult again. What is the differences in writing those two styles for you? And have you found your groove, do you think, in this new adult space?
I definitely feel like I've found my groove. And it's going to continue to be a learning curve. Every book is. It's funny because when I wrote the Oromir Chronicles, which is the first YA series I did, I didn't really think too deeply about what you are and aren't allowed to write as a young adult author. Like I said, it touched on addiction. There is gore, there is violence. I suppose the only thing that it doesn't massively touch on is sex. And, my second YA series, it's a slow burn, but there is explicit content in the last book, because I think I really struggled to wrap my head around the dichotomy of writing. You're allowed to write as much violence and torture and horrible stuff as you want for young adults, but not sex. That I've never been able to get on board with. So I think I sort of towed the line in YA anyway with that sort of stuff and the darker content. But I definitely feel like now that I write adult, I have a lot more freedom, and I'm not worried I'm going to piss someone off for having sex in it. I've got permission. I've given myself permission to write as many sex scenes and make it as explicit as possible, or write that darker content in terms of just the themes. Because fantasy, you expect battles, you expect violence, but I think writing in the adult space is just a little bit more freeing. I'm not constantly second guessing myself. And also, you mentioned that from Blood and Steel to Vows and Ruins, it sort of became a bit more adult. And I think that trajectory is pretty on point for the rest of the series. My beta reader for the fourth book. So the fourth book is currently with the copy editor. And she said it's quite dark. And it goes into this much darker place, which, as a series progresses, particularly with a fantasy plot, which is building up to battles and, an ultimate good versus evil moment, you do go into that darker space. Having the adult label on it just gives me permission to do that in a much more in-depth way, I think.
Yeah. Talking about spicy seeds. How do you find writing spice? I've heard a lot of authors say writing battle scenes and writing spice is almost very similar, because you've got to get the choreography right in terms of what is who is where and what is happening. Do you come at it from a very analytical place, or did you have to do research?
Research, I suppose, in the way that I read a lot of romance naturally, and if I come across a scene that did work or didn't work, I want to think about why that was the case. And I suppose, you're right in that it can be sort of like the logistics of a spicy scene and working out, if they're in this setting, what are the obstacles? What, is it physically possible to do this in this particular environment? That sort of stuff. And also, I think more importantly, potentially, is like the emotional beat that happens on. And does that make sense for this to happen at this point? And how does that impact the emotion of both the characters? Because the most powerful spicy scenes are the ones that are interwoven with those emotional beats, I think. So, in one sense, the logistics of it, I am thinking about it and, marking it out in my head, like where things are going and all that sort of stuff. But also, is it going to be as powerful as it can be? Because what has happened previously? What beats have we hit before here? in order to make it this, mind-blowing moment, and this moment that is like this punch to the gut. That is
Definitely a
usually what I'm thinking about.
the end of Vows, which we will get into very shortly. Was that punch to the gut, I will say.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm still shouting your name into the void. Were you nervous moving into adult books?
Yeah, I was, because, I don't have a pen name. My name is my name, which is something that potentially, if I could go back, I might change, just for sort of privacy reasons and to protect myself.
Yeah.
I've found that a little bit difficult. There's no buffer. It's like people can look me up and find me, and that's can be a little bit scary. Also, the people you already know in your personal life, it can be a little bit weird. And I definitely had some, less than desirable comments and reviews after people had read my young adult stuff, which I was very, very clear. I was moving into adult and it was going to be explicit. If that's not your thing, no worries. Just don't read it. So I did have a bit of backlash about that. I had some comments, people telling me that I'd sold out or that I was writing porn, and, just not very nice. But I anticipated that. I could have said, however, I could have been as detailed as I possibly could about the shift. People were still going to read it. People were still going to complain. I did what I could, and that's all. But yeah, it was definitely nerve-wracking. When that first book came out, I feel like I've hardened up a bit in the last little while about people's comments. If you don't like spice and you don't like, beautiful warrior men in bathtubs, then that's your choice.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to some spoiler chat now for Legends of Thezmarr. So if you haven't finished Vows and Ruins or read Slaying the Shadow Prince, pause this now and you can come back to it later. So book 1, Blood and Steel. Book 2, Vows and Ruins. And then the prequel novel, standalone, Slaying the Shadow Prince. Do you have, I know you've said that the prequel can be read in any order. Do you think there is a better place to read it, personally?
Oh, I don't really know. I really think it could be read any which way. Potentially between Blood and Steel and Vows and Ruins, or after Vows and Ruins, because you might need a bit of hand-holding after that.
Yes, you do. I read it second because that was when it was published.
That was the publication order, yeah. So that was part of Mortal Enemies to Monster Lovers, which was the multi-author series, and my publication date just happened to fall in between Blood and Steel and Vows and Ruins.
It was quite funny. My friend Shelley has read it first, so she read it.
Oh wow, okay.
Before going into Blood and Steel, and she's now I think she was voice DMing me at 12 p.m. last night. She was 50% into Vows and Ruins, so she's sending me updates on what her theories are so far, and I'm just going, I'm not saying anything until you get. So how has this series in particular been received compared to your previous series?
Very, very well, to be honest. Oromir Chronicles, which was my first, was sort of like this outlier. It's not often that your first series does really well. Oromir Chronicles did well enough. Well, the first book did well enough for me to become a full-time author, which is pretty unheard of. And I don't think I really understood that at the time. I was like, oh, this is great. Now I can just do this full-time. And I didn't really interrogate that concept much deeper than that. The second series, Curse of the Siren Queen, didn't do as well. And that was a really hard, it did fine, but in terms of expectations and after what I'd experienced with the first series, it was hard. It was hard going. And then Blood and Steel took off, which was really, really good to see, because I like to be able to eat food and pay my bills. So yeah, it's been really well received. Yeah.
If we're talking about the main series rather than the prequel, who is your hardest and your easiest characters to write?
Ooh, easiest, I think I think would be Kip, because Kip is the kind of comic relief side character, bit of a rascal. He's the easiest to write because he's the funnest to write.
Yes.
And the sort of themes and relationships and stuff can get quite heavy in this series.
Yeah.
And so he, to me, is the breath of fresh air when I need it. And me and my partner, we have a lot of fun sort of brainstorming what ridiculous thing can Kip do next. And so yeah, he's probably the easiest to write, and the most fun. The hardest, I think, is Wilder, because he has kind of this traumatic past, and teasing that out in a way that is realistic and also hits those emotional beats and also justifies his actions, it can be quite challenging. So I would say he's probably the hardest to write, because I want to get him right. Yeah.
Well, also hiding things from us, right? And but giving his intentions that feel pure and authentic in the moment, so you're not questioning him too much.
It's a delicate balance, yeah.
What was your favourite spice scene to write in Vows? Because there was a lot of imagination in that scene. I think in my review, when I spoke about it, I said there was a boat scene. I think there was a cave scene.
I forgot about the boat scene. Yeah.
There's lots of different scenes.
I wanted their relationship to progress. Like, you actually see them together in Vows and Ruins. Yeah. And so, over the course of however long it spans, certain things develop, you try different things,
That really authentic battle of wills between people who didn't want to be together but can't stop wanting to be together. The scene that broke my heart the most because of what happened in the next scene is the tent scene. At the very end of the book, you could feel the weight of something coming, and I think that's when you can really explore how spice isn't just always there for spice. It can actually really hit those emotional beats in the plot as well, because when I was reading that scene, it felt so emotionally charged for me, and I could just feel something was about to happen.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad, because that was definitely the intention. Yeah. And I mean, emotionally charged is definitely how I would describe that scene. And that was definitely what I was building up to throughout the course of the book. And we get to see them sort of in different contexts and different, I suppose, settings for the relationship itself. And then it all sort of came to that moment where that decision was made. In terms of favorite one to write, I think the hot pools scene was. Yes, I'm like, was that the right book? Yes, yeah, it was. No, because that was also quite emotionally charged, I think. So I love it when there's kind of like this explosion of emotion that they just can't keep in anymore, and that is where he first tells her that he loves her, and it's like, finally. And then it's this sort of that moment where they've both said it, and that's it, they're together now. And so that was definitely really fun and really satisfying to write, because however many hundreds of thousands of words to get to that point. Yeah.
It's feel really satisfying when you finally get those words on paper that you've been building up to for so long.
And I think like what I liked about that scene, like less so than the more so than the spice, was like how he said it to her. Was it was very Wilder way how to say I love you, because I fucking love you. It's just
Apart from the spice, what was probably like the easiest or the hardest scenes to actually write in Vows?
I guess her sort of learning about who she is and the development of that, trying to, I suppose, stagger that in a way, because there's a lot of threads. There's so many threads in this series that have to sort of, you've got to put them out there at first, and then you've slowly got to weave them all together. And, that was quite challenging to write, knowing what I knew about the next two books, essentially. So that was quite difficult. In terms of I mean, easy, anything with Kip and Cal bantering back and forth, just like that just flows out of me because it's just so fun. And then, yeah, I suppose whenever they're traveling, like I live in the mountains basically in New Zealand, and I have this gorgeous setting just outside the window. So the sort of more lyrical descriptions of settings and stuff can just sort of, flow very nicely. So those are sort of the breath of fresh air in between the really like emotionally fraught and action packed stuff, I think.
I loved Thea at the beginning of Vows and the way her characterization of how angry she was and after everything that happened at the end of Blood and Steel, and even just how scrappy she was, like, getting into fights and hurting herself, and those sort of things we normally see depicted in a male main character. And I really loved seeing that in a female main character and just getting to explore her anger, rightful anger over everything that's happening to her in her life. Do you find feminine rage fun to write?
Yes, very fun and very like talk about easy. Like you can draw on. I've got nearly 34 years experience of female rage to draw on. And I mean that is just going to be sort of, I suppose, amplified in what's to come in this series because, she's got a lot to be angry about.
I'm angry with her. I am angry with her. I've highlighted this scene when we were talking about the tent scene. And then Wilder woke before dawn, before the rest of the world. For a moment, time stilled as he watched Thea, as he studied her fierce beauty, softened by sleep. He memorized the way her lashes kissed the top of her cheeks, the way her lips parted slightly and her chest rose and fell. Then he dressed in silence, steeling himself with every piece of clothing, each piece of armor. He looked at Thea one last time. And I remember I was like, what do you mean one last time? I love you, he whispered, knowing that there was no going back from what he was about to do. He forced one foot in front of the other and left the tent while he still had the strength. Tears stung his eyes, but he kept walking. No matter where he went, he would carry Thea with him. She was a part of him now, always.
That's the first time I've heard that like said to me. I was like, oh.
Yeah, that really hit me, Helen.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And you could see a lot of the things coming, right? Like after reading the prequel, you know that, the half race aren't necessarily bad. Tal isn't so there's all these things happening, and the way Wilder is dealing with them as they come along, like whether he kills them or lets them go, or what he's doing to them to try and keep this secret. So he's trying to play both sides. But the ending and what happened was still an absolute shock. Are there any scenes like that you've had people come into your DMs or have been highlighted the most? Are there any scenes that people gravitate to the most?
I got a lot of DMs that just start with my name in capitals and like 20 exclamation marks. And my heart, every time I see one pop up, I'm like, oh God, this is it. This is the one where they're going to absolutely tear me to shreds. They're like, and I have had like some angry ones, because people get emotionally invested in it. But definitely the ending for Vows and Ruins, I think I've got the most vocal feedback about people being heartbroken, people, tearing their hair out and stuff. I get sent, memes and GIFs and all that sort of stuff about it. So it has definitely hit like an emotional sort of beat or something. It's resonated with a lot of people, the ending, because it is just a major emotional cliffhanger.
You hit it so well within Wilder's POV. So that was one of my questions. How do you hide things within his POV so while also teasing so that ending is a shock?
It's a benefit to using close third person rather than first person. So it's not an internal monologue the whole time. Yes. So you can see things through his eyes without hearing his thoughts. You can feel his reaction to things without having it explained, like verbally from the character, what is happening. So that's definitely one advantage to using that particular point of view and perspective. It was a process. It is a layering in as the drafts developed, what you could and couldn't say. I had a lot of conversations with my editor and with my beta readers. Is this too obvious? Is this not obvious enough? Because it is a fine balance between wanting to lay the groundwork and still having that shock factor, but you don't want the shock factor without any of the groundwork, because then it's not very powerful. It's just comes out of nowhere. So it's definitely that balance of layering this stuff in just subtly enough that, you know, people know something's coming, but they don't know what.
Sorry? You use misdirects, so you're trying to like, have a look over here. Everyone's looking for the sisters, but maybe that's a misdirect over what he's thinking, when he's really, now we know, thinking about, is he working with the daughter of darkness? Is the daughter of darkness evil?
I'm not telling you.
At that end of book 3, you really, it makes you look back at everything and go, huh, okay, so this person, I don't know who's good or bad anymore.
Yeah. That's definitely and that's the beauty of having a big cast as well, is that, you know, everybody can have different roles. The roles can change, and also the roles change depending on who's looking at what this person is doing. So that's definitely, you definitely have some flexibility in terms of a broader cast and having dual point of view as well. So Thea can watch Wilder do something and interpret it completely differently to his actual intentions. And having that throughout the course of the book then makes the reader question, well, who do I believe? What, you know?
Did you ever have to change? Like, were you ever writing something in maybe Wilder's point of view and go, I can't hide it, I might have to change it to Thea's point of view here or something? Did you ever have to do that, or did you plan already ahead? And
I've definitely changed the point of view in certain scenes, but from memory, it wasn't in order to hide certain things. The question to me is always, is this reveal more powerful from her point of view or his point of view? Whose eyes do we want to see this particular scene through to make it the most impactful? That's usually how my thought process goes.
Because every time I saw him, you know, helping a shadow, you know, half shadow race, or things were happening, I always thought it was to do with helping to protect Tao. I never pieced it together that he could be possibly working with who we now know is Thea's sister. That just never occurred to me. Like, so when everything was happening, I was like, yeah, I can see why he's doing those things, because I'd read the prequel. I was like, he's trying to protect Hal. And then, that ending.
I'm like very tight-lipped at the moment. I'm trying, like, I don't want to spoil anything.
Do you ever cry when you're writing your books? Do you get emotional with certain scenes?
I definitely get emotional with certain scenes, because I think particular scenes you've got to dig deep for. How would I feel if this was me? You know, and that almost like physical reaction to particular emotions, like you have to draw on personal experience, or, you know, put yourself in the character's shoes and, you know, ask yourself some pretty dark questions. Yeah, I'm not a big crier in general, so also, like, I'm in control of it. I think a lot of the time when you cry, it's because you're taken by surprise. You're not seeing that, you know, you get hit in a certain way that you weren't expecting. But yeah, you definitely have to get emotional, I think, in order to create the sort of emotional punch that you want in certain scenes. For sure.
One of the things I particularly love about your writing is, for a high fantasy, I never feel like I am confused. So I'm never confused about the world building.
Oh, that's good.
Or what's going on, or who's who. I find that you explain things in a way that doesn't feel like I'm like getting info dumped on. But also you give characters real time to learn and grow. So by the end end of Vows and Ruins, I really believed that Thea could do all of the things that she could do because we'd had those 2 books leading up with her training and everything that she had gone through. And every plot point, even when she was training, I was still learning information, whether it was about their relationship together or something about the world or about character growth. So when you're plotting out, is that the sort of stuff you're trying to layer in each time? You're trying to make it really believable, but also give what's the purpose of this scene, while also not
Definitely.
just moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I try and make sure that each scene has a purpose. I am very conscious of info dumping because in fantasy, like it's quite common, particularly in the first book of a new series, you are doing a lot of world building. But I try and make the magic and all that sort of stuff not overly complicated. Like I don't have a huge sprawling magic system that you need a diagram to understand. At its core, it's good versus evil. And so, that then tends to come through quite naturally, I think. And also that's why you have the editorial process is so that if you are info dumping, someone pulls you up on it. And how do we then layer this information into the story rather than just here's a chapter on what this place looks like,
Yes. And then I guess it's about pacing, right? And like how can you put in all of those little tidbits?
Yeah, exactly.
So Wilder's betrayal was always going to happen. We were always leading to that.
Yeah. I definitely from the beginning knew the emotional punch that I wanted that to have, and I knew the vibes I wanted the reader to have at the end, because I think that's quite a powerful thing to happen in book 2 of a 4-book series, because where does it go from there? It can be quite exciting.
Yeah, it really felt like it flipped everything on its head. As the reader, you think you know where the story's going. The couple's finally got together. There's going to be a big battle scene, and then that completely goes. Well, now I need to know. I really need book 3. Like you definitely hooked everybody in to be like, well, I cannot wait till the next book comes out.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So, what should we expect in book 3? Without giving spoilers, what are the
vibes? Okay, you get a lot more feminine rage for sure. A lot of angst, a lot of enemies to lovers. Yeah.
I'm just looking at my notes and I've got, oh my God, now he's washing her hair.
I thought you'd like that one.
What are the king's motives? Why did he use his power on her? What does the king's daughter know? What is her magic? So there's a lot still unknown. There's still a lot of questions. And I think because of the ending of Vows and Ruins, everything that we thought was happening is now flipped on its head. So we're going to get more answers in regards to the big players.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to string people along to book 4 without getting any sort of payoff in book 3. You get a lot of payoff in book 3, and then book 4 is obviously the big finale. But yeah, I like to think that you do get a lot of answers in book 3.
His last goodbye in the tent broke my heart. I can see why he freed the half race, but working with Anya, what the fuck? I don't understand. Unless he isn't actually part of the army and the Reapers, we never actually see her with them, right? She was in the forest using the shadows. Is he trying to stop the terror? Is Wilder working with Tal, or is he really on the wrong side? Oh my God, my mind is blown. And that was the last note I had for myself.
Oh, I love it.
Do you have an expected release date for book 4?
It'll be in the second half of 2024, but definitely this year. I'll definitely have the series finished this year for sure.
Anything that you can give us about what to expect in Fate and Furies that we don't already know?
Potentially similar reactions to the end.
Another cliffhanger.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's the penultimate installment. I think I can safely say any of my books except the last book in a series will probably have a cliffhanger.
Prepare to be emotionally damaged.
Yes.
Okay, to to wrap up, we're just going to ask a couple of last questions. Is there a particular character that you personally identify with more in any of your books? I know you've called yourself a bit of an introvert.
Probably like all my main female characters, there is an element to them that I relate to. I suppose in Curse of the Siren Queen, Ro, who's the main female protagonist, she's incredibly ambitious. She goes after what she wants, but she also has a very much anxiety riddled side to her. So I relate to that quite a lot. And also Thea, similar. I think any of my female main characters who have this very ambitious drive that comes from me. But yeah, definitely with Ro, she has this sort of like bit of anxiety as well, which I relate to.
I relate to it too. And what was the favourite book that you read recently? Not your own. What was your favourite book that you recently read?
Oh, I read one of Megan Quinn's books. It's a hockey romance, which I'm like just devouring at the moment. Like I'm loving hockey romance. I never saw that coming. Never saw it coming. But apparently, I love hockey romance. And I forget what it was called. But
she's prolific in that genre. She's got a whole bunch, doesn't she?
Yeah. And I mean, I've read a lot of hockey romance this year, so I'll probably, if I say the title, it's probably not even hers. But she's got like similar setup to a lot of them, like a team, and each book is one team member's romance. It's like he's not that kind, or he's not my type, or something like one of those. Yes. But yeah, I devoured it in like a day, and it was just pure escapism. Really fun. Yeah.
Donating your time today, Helen.
No worries at all. What a pleasure.
It has been an absolute delight chatting to you today. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone else, if you want more of these author conversations, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you would like to let me know what authors you would like me to interview, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you, Helen.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a fun way to spend the afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye.